I would love to welcome up for her masked debut, telling the story The Pecan Doesn't Fall Far, Dr. Kandy Noles Stevens.
Well, I am so excited to join Masked and to be here today for my debut. This is a topic that falls really, really close to my heart, and this week has a lot of meaning for me. And so as my story unfolds today, you'll learn a little bit more. But what I'm going to tell you is that my understanding of my role in this group is that I am the displaced Southerner, as I am the only one that has the distinction of being born and bred in the South. And so my story has a lot to do with my upbringing. Now, in my story, I have always felt, even within my Southern family, that I was somehow a little bit different. And my own family thinks I'm a little bit odd for not still living in Florida. Pensacola is my hometown. And there's other things that we have learned over the years that are vastly different from if you grew up in North Dakota like my husband versus myself growing up in the deep, deep South. So the very first thing that we noticed when we came here were just some obvious differences. And I try to relate these to my students at SMSU. And I tell them about them as the time unfolds. But one of the things that always strikes my students when at the beginning of the semester, I try to explain to them that anybody can, that there's this power of yet, and that with enough hard work, you can get to achieving your educational goals. And I always share this story because they see me with this title, and they see me with this accomplishments and the things that I've done, but they don't know where I came from. And where I came from is I have grandparents, the highest educational attainment that any of them achieved was the 8th grade, and that was only one of them. Mm-hmm. The other 3 only ever made it to the 3rd grade, and that I grew up coming from sharecropping and subsistence farmers, and all 4 of my grandparents spent the majority of their childhood, teen, and young adulthood picking cotton. Mm-hmm. And that is such a foreign thing for Minnesota kids to wrap their minds around, that I come from cotton pickers. Mm-hmm. So one of the other things that I have learned over my time in Minnesota, because I've lived here for a lot of years, is that I've learned to acclimate. My family in the South still always asks about, do you still plug in your cars? They think that's the weirdest thing ever. I have learned to become accustomed to what a hot dish is. I was very terrified to hold the first plate when somebody told me about it. I have understood that if I'm going to have barbecues, that it is not going to come from a Southern pit. It is going to be hamburger on a bun. I have learned to love lefse, but I have yet to wrap my mind around rhubarb. I still can't get it. It's like sweet celery, and I don't quite understand it. I don't know why anybody would eat that, but I try. But the thing that struck me the most, because I come from a clan of nomadic Southern Baptists, and by the time I had gotten married, I had moved more times than I was years old. Mm-hmm. And so when I was first transported from the deep South to the upper Midwest, namely North Dakota, everyone was talking about their grandma and grandpa, and I had no idea what that meant. Now, as I've already told you, I had grandparents, and I had them well into my adulthood. But in the South, we do not call them grandma and grandpa. And in my case, I grew up with a nanny and a granddaddy, and a mama and a papa. Mm-hmm. And so they were my whole world. And much of my childhood, particularly up until I graduated from high school, we lived near nanny and granddaddy. Now, I am the oldest grandchild, so my granddaddy was my whole world. But there was this day in January of 1973 where he etched his place in the Superhero Hall of Fame. Now, you may not know about that day, but I will enlighten you. because they decided they were going to have another baby. I didn't quite understand why they needed one, but they insisted. So here we were, me and Great Aunt Lou, and she had been outside doing some laundry in the carport because we didn't have a garage. We had a little room off of the carport, and she was out there. Now across the street lived Nanny and Granddaddy, and I loved going back and forth between my house and their home. And on this particular day, a traveling circus was making its way on the outskirts of Pensacola, which is where we lived. But somehow, the billy goat of the traveling circus got loose and was running amok, creating havoc and destruction in our neighborhood on Flagler Drive. So I looked out the window to see all of the men, including my sweet granddaddy, running around chasing this billy goat. And at some point in all of this chaos, the billy goat fixated itself on the picture window. Now, if you don't know this about male goats, when they meet another male goat that they've never met before, they have sort of a ritual, and it involves a lot of testosterone. And so the image of himself on the picture window, behind which a sweet, tiny little 3-year-old girl was standing. She was terrified because he kept ramming the window. So even at that young age, which I didn't share before, another difference between me and all of my family members is I have a love and a passion for all things science and mathematics. And even at 3, I understood the physics of billy goat and picture window. So I decided that I was going to seek help because that seemed like the logical thing and probably something Sesame Street had taught me. So I went out to the carport and only to discover that prior to finding the picture window, the billy goat had had an entanglement with my Great Aunt Lou, who he had knocked out flat in the laundry room. So she was of no help or assistance in that matter. And I decided in my infinite wisdom that there was one and one only person who could save me that day. So I decided to make a break for it. And I lit out that side carport door, which was the farthest door away from said billy goat. And I ran across the street with my arms up, screaming, "Save me, Granddaddy, save me, Granddaddy." And to his dying day, he said that was the greatest day of his life because he was somebody's hero that day. Now, my Granddaddy had 3 loves. Granddaddy loved me, fishing, and NASCAR. Now, I was his buddy because I was the oldest. So we went everywhere together. And what you probably wouldn't know about my Granddaddy, because he was a pretty nondescript naval yard worker who, spent his life there and eventually earned a pension, was that he was the original talent scout for America's Got Talent. Only it was really more so like take my granddaughter all around Pensacola and show her off. So our favorite thing to do, and I promise you, if you were to go home today and you were to look up the top 10 tourist attractions in the state of Florida, one of the things on the list, and that has been there perennially, is Joe Patty's Seafood Market. And we would travel down to the bay, and we would buy, me and Granddaddy, and we would buy the shrimp right off of the boats via Joe Patty's Seafood Market. Now, as a little girl, I hated fish. I absolutely hated it because my Granddaddy drugged me there every time. And at the time, it doesn't look that way today, but at the time it was these big cooler cases packed with the nugget ice, the kind that everybody loves to chomp on from Sonic. And the fish were there and all those eyes. And I hated it. I was terrified of those fish. And I wouldn't eat it, I wouldn't look at it. But there was Granddaddy, the original talent scout, and he would say, "Go ahead, baby, sing for him." Now, I was a one-hit wonder, and the only song that I knew was this one, and I would belt it out because he had already earned the place as superhero, and I figured I was indebted to him. And here I was, and my 3-year-old little self. Delta Dawn was that flower you had And I would belt it out every single time, and he would be beaming with pride on the side. If America's Got Talent existed in 1973, he would have signed me up. But traveling with those nomadic Southern Baptists, eventually I moved away the day after I graduated from high school, from the exact same high school my mother attended. And I didn't come back to the South until I was in graduate school. And I decided to attend graduate school for chemistry at Auburn University, which is my dad's hometown. There's two little towns that are right close together, Auburn, Alabama, and Opelika, Alabama. My daddy was from Opelika, Alabama. And when I got to Auburn, I needed a bed because I was young and I didn't have all those things. And so my papa told me that he had an old bed out in the barn. So we went out and we dug that out, and we decided it needed a little work, and we drove it down to Tuskegee, Alabama, to his body shop man. And when we got there, my papa told me I could pick any color that I wanted to decorate this bed. And so I picked out this beautiful, shiny red paint. What I didn't know at the time, until we went to pick it up, was that it was Porsche paint. The most expensive paint they had. So when I picked it out, I didn't know. And on the drive home, my grandfather proceeded to tell me that I had lost my dang mind. That I did not appreciate Alabama historical artifacts such as an old metal bed in a barn, because I was going to cover it in red. And that was going to be the ugliest thing he had ever seen in his lifetime. So when it came time to pick up the red bed, we took the pickup. Before we left, he asked me and Mama to pick up all of the quilts because he was going to hide that bed. Because no one should see that I was no longer a Southerner by picking out a red bed. But when we got there, the body shop owner in Tuskegee had it sitting out in the Alabama sun. It was right on the Georgia line there, and out in the sun, and that Porsche paint sparkled as if it was a brand new car coming off the line. My mama, who came along just for the entertainment value of this trip, decided to get out, and we were trying to start packing it up and covering it with all these quilts. And he said to us, "What are you girls doing?" We said, "We're covering it up like you told us." "Oh no, those were just to cushion it." And then we proceeded to take the slow road back to Opelika. And I think we drove every street in that town with the red bed popped up in the back of that pickup truck so that everyone could see his best idea ever. Now, when I was there in graduate school, Southern tradition still existed. And there was this young man who was a friend of my cousin's, and he wanted to take me out on a date. But in order to do that, he had to come in and visit with my grandparents. And so his name was Carl, and this old boy came in, and he sat down, and he had a visit with my grandparents. I think my grandmother made chocolate cake and lemonade, very Southern. I don't think that combination really goes that well together, but that's what we had. And we were visiting, and my papa was talking, and he was telling his story. And his story had to do something like this about how his chickens were his best friend. And that he could go out on the front porch, and he could sit down on the front porch. And he could have a chicken on this shoulder and a chicken on this shoulder. They might go on his farmer hat, too. And they would tell him stories, and he would converse back. And about this point, my mama was about 50 shades of embarrassed. And she wanted this conversation to be older. So she leaned over to Carl, and she said, "I bet you didn't know that Kandy's papa is fluent in chicken." Didn't end the story. And poor Carl sat through many more. But that story became one that he told over and over. And the one piece that he didn't say in the story was the fact that those chickens never soiled his overalls. Because, see, my papa, much like my granddaddy, became a Navy Yard worker. My papa was a retired police officer, but the day that he retired, the only thing I ever saw the man wear, including to church, was a pair of overalls. And those stories continued to come back over and over. And as dementia set in, we would hear the same story over and over, and I would laugh every time at the funny parts. And I would never argue with him, even when he told us that Coke was being made in Saudi Arabia, and that's why it tasted different. And then I fast forward into time, and I grew up, and I moved to Minnesota, and I had a family. And I continued to think I was a little bit different because I didn't stay in the South. And just the other day, I was out working in my garden, and I was listening to the radio, and this new song came on by the country music artist Thomas Rhett. And the song goes something like this, that I love me some California, so if we inserted Minnesota there. But I sure miss Tennessee, and my roots down there in Georgia, they started missing me. And I wouldn't trade the things I've done for the places that I've been. But it sure feels good to be Southern again. And I got up from the garden, and I had tears coming down my eyes. And I rested on this little blue pickup. That was the last thing that my papa remembered when he was in the Alzheimer's unit before he passed away. And I brushed off my overalls, and I went inside to make a mess of fish and a little bit of cornbread. So, the pecan doesn't fall very far from the tree, no matter how far she moves away. And I'm pretty sure that my granddaddy and my papa would still be proud.